called Vinci model. And I'm going to go through and talk about, one, we're going to view different ways of doing multi-age learning. So we have a big picture view. Then we're going to inquire, we're going to ask starter questions. All right? We're all going to be involved in that. And then we're going to take some notes about the research that grounds this best practice. All right? And when you say grounds, what does that mean, grounds best practice? It means that someone had to do so much research that it took years and years and years for someone to just get it published. And as we know on the internet, we can get a lot of things published that hasn't gone through a lot of scrutiny. So I'm going to be talking about the hard research, as I would call it, that goes into that. Then we're going to create a list of understandings about it. So the create word is there. And then hopefully we're going to inspire each other because we're going to do an activity that's called a PLC. And that's something teachers usually do, and it's called professional learning community. But I think it stands for parent learning community today. So you're going to do an exercise that will help you sort of reflect and go back on this with your group and helpers. So that's kind of our guideline we're going to go through for this presentation. So I want to say that when I first found out about Da Vinci, I said, what about this word Vinci? What does it mean? And it's actually Italian for the word knot. So what I'd like to do is unpack that knot, or have you take a knot apart. Because you can see examples in Arlington and other places that have excellent multi-age learning, but how did they get there? So sometimes you see the product, you have to unwrap it to be able to see how those parts fit together. So my mini project tonight is I'm going to try to unravel that knot. So before we go any further, I want you to think of something that you learned that was really challenging. All right, think about that. Something you're very proud of doing. And then I want you to try to unravel that challenge. How did you get there? Talk to a partner. Go. Tell somebody about a challenge. Go ahead. Yeah, talk to somebody. For the most part, we're trying to get students to talk, because talk's the closest thing to thought. So what tends to happen in these groupings, when you ask somebody to do one of these challenges, just do what we call pair and share, what's happening is usually the student should try to add on to what the person who's sharing is talking about. Because that's a lot for you to unravel that. I mean, it could take maybe an hour to really do that question properly. But it's important to know that, if that's natural for you to build on, that's exactly what's good for the brain. So now we're going to talk about how to learn. Take a look at this pyramid. Hands up. You've seen something like this before? Some people have? Okay. When I was doing research on peer teaching, where older students were teaching younger students, I wound up also doing some where younger students were teaching older students. We called it teaching up. We did a lot of work in that area, and I did that because teaching others means that 90% of what you teach someone else is going to be learned and embedded. So why are we not doing that more in school? The emphasis in school tends to be at the top of the pyramid. And I know that we need to do all of those things because they all will contribute. But what tends to happen if you only have 10% maybe focusing only on the reading program, then what happens is those kids that are more able to understand reading are going to score well. And that's why you can keep that nice little bell curve going, because you'll only have a few at the top, because that's that 10% that'll be there. So it works out quite nicely. But if you want to blow the bell curve away, you've got to look at all those other kinds of learning. In a multi-age class, it's set up in such a way that you need to be breaking down what's going on. So it's not just, having multi-age and then you have a teacher at the front doing all the direction. We need kids to talk. If they don't talk, they can't move from novice to apprentice to expert. Impossible. They can write it all down, they can get, a perfect math test, but if they don't talk the math, they're going to hit a ceiling. And that ceiling probably in math would happen about grade 9 or 10. Because they can't talk it through, they're going to hit that barrier. So we have to use this multi-age as a great opportunity to talk about using talk better. So how do you learn best? Hands up if you think that teaching others, how many have had an opportunity to do that? Hands up. Okay, so when you talk about it and teach others, you're learning more. Hands up if you think just practice doing is enough. No? Okay. So that can be very helpful because hands-on is important. We're trying to build in all of these. Don't think we're just putting all our emphasis there. So when we have teaching buddies and so on, I'll go through this right now. So these are the different views of the multi-age learning. You can have the grade groupings, which we've now set up as part of our major way we do the curriculum. So we have 1 to 3 age level variants, and we know that many of the kids at the younger end can benefit, and more kids at the upper end benefit when we do look at the research. So I'll go through that in more detail as well. Peer teaching is when you really do deliberately go outside of your classroom unit. So a peer teaching situation would be when a grade 3 might go into a K1-2 class and plan a lesson or work as a buddy. So here, buddy situation might be 1-to-1 where they're reading buddies, but you may have small groups where they plan things. Leadership situations can occur as well. So these are all ways that peer teaching can occur. And finally, adult and child co-investigators. Very rare, and you're all involved in either doing the postcards or making those planets, but definitely that's an opportunity where a child who has a language at the novice level and a parent who has more language at potentially a novice level come together, but the language itself can grow together in a co-investigation. And this is very important when we talk about collective intelligence. Everything in school tends, when you get your SATs and get your ACTs, it's all about that individual. And then you get out into the real world, and it's about how you can move other people to action. So at what period of time are we going to give kids those opportunities and the feedback for that? So co-investigation is important. Hopefully the Nassau Parent Space Camp will be something that many of you will experience. We're going to try and get that going. Ken, are you the lead on that one, I think? Maybe? To be determined. Sorry, I didn't mean to...
Kelly and Ken.
Kelly and Ken in March. But that would be something to talk about because it's a planned program where we're both together, but you're with all the other people who come with a parent and child. And that's one of the best programs that's there. What multi-age learning is not, it is not split grades. Okay, let's get that off the table. If you thought it was, then yeah, that's hopefully at the end, that would be another thing to say, no, there's a big difference. Split grades is done out of economic convenience, and a teacher tries to run 2 separate programs at the same time. So that's the difference. So let's talk about inquire. These are some of the questions that I had come to me over time about, what are these benefits? So that's why we're doing this presentation tonight. How will we know if it's working? All right, so we are going to gather some data, some feedback from parents, feedback from teachers, feedback from students about the program. So we are not going to just sort of randomly keep doing something if it's not effective. So it's important to know. Also, what predictions can we make right now? So that's something to think about. We've now had the students for almost a month. We can make some predictions about how we can organize the physical space and organize the activities so they're going to be more beneficial. We'll talk to that. And what is the plan at Middleburg? What does it look like here? So I'm hoping those 4 questions are questions you've had, and we'll still certainly may have some more, but I want to start with those. Okay, let's get down to some of the research, taking note. The benefits are hands-on and experiential learning. So you just have to Google hands-on learning or experiential learning, and you will find many, many, many more things to read. But this is the best way that multi-age learning works. So you have to make sure that there's going to be the hands-on pieces, and certainly what we're doing in math and what's happening. I think if you saw the roller coasters that are out there in the experimental way, definitely that's an example of the hands-on, and they're thinking about trials and how can they fix the mechanics of how something works for it to be more successful. Also, students work at their own pace. And that's important because we know one thing for sure is that kids are not the same in one grade. They never have been and they never will. So here we actually recognize and understand uneven development. And I know this isn't a popular thing to say, the male gender, but it does take a while sometimes in the research. It tells us that sometimes it's not up until grade 11 that a lot of male students catch up intellectually to the female students. So I'll say something, in Canada, we actually don't have a GPA that counts grade 9 and 10 because we know it's not fair to the males. We just average grade 11 and 12, and our graduates do just fine. But that's something that people just take for granted. They're just like, oh, I never thought of that. And anyway, something to think about, but it does address uneven development in how we systematically set up how people get into, like, say, our colleges and so on. Number 3, teachers stay with students. This is called looping. You can Google looping and find out more about looping. And if you look at test scores, teachers that have had their kids for grade 2, 3, and 4, they stay with them. Their kids sometimes do 10, 15 points higher than the other because they've already been with those teachers. They know the rules. They don't have to reteach how the teacher does things. So they don't have to learn a new teacher each year. We also recognize that maybe this teacher might not be the best teacher for your child. So at the end of each year, we will consider all of those things. So it's not like, oh my goodness, they're here for 3 years and we can't, make a decision. We are also flexible enough to understand that we may have to make some changes. But ideally for the student, if it can be in the same place with that teacher, it's really beneficial. The teacher picks up where the student left off, so you don't have to do as much of the diagnostic testing that we've had to do when kids have come in now, because we want to see where everybody's at. We need to know that before we move forward. And it's spread out over more than 1 year. Okay, so now we're really looking at a 3-year program. And I know when I've taught multi-age groupings before, sometimes in grade 3 they might do their outline for a novel. In grade 4 they might do their draft of a novel. And then in grade 5 they actually revise and publish their novel. So they have, it's a 3-year process. And that's just like the real world. A lot of novels can take 3 years. Rather than, rushed pieces of writing all the time and they're just handing in a draft. Whenever we have to do something for anything that we're writing, we don't usually just hand in the first thing that comes into our heads. So we have to teach the students those skills, but we've got time to do it well. And also immersing like expert students. That's what I was really trying to say. I've been using that novice to expert word quite a bit. Okay, number 5, this is one of those academic words, the Z, I want to say ZPD, but it's ZPD, is the zone of proximal development. Those are just big, googly words, but they actually mean a lot. We in education have depended almost solely on Piaget as the psychologist that was, telling us exactly what we teach students and when we teach students, and they said, and don't teach them abstract things till they're teenagers. And then Vygotsky came along and said, well, we're in Russia, and of course he did this in the 30s. He said, we've been, 1930s, we've been teaching abstract things to our 5- and 6-year-olds forever. Okay, so this is something to think about. It's like, oh, so maybe we can teach things that are more challenging to younger kids. And on that note, I'm going to talk about this word appropriate. So if you want to mimic something, you have to hear the language and hear other people using it. And kids do a better job of learning a more difficult language when they hear it from another student, not just from the teacher. All right? And that tends to be the gap gets bigger because the more the teacher talks, the more the teacher learns, and the gap gets wider. So we have to deliberately create these situations where they're teaching and talking with one another. So we call that appropriating the language. So that's a little word that I think is important. So you're building it in, it's an apprenticeship model. which is really popular more so in business. Okay, there's more research. I'm going to give it all to you all up front here in the note-taking part. Authentic learning is very powerful. Kids are not engaged because they don't see the point, and they're bored in many, many, many schools. So engagement is really important to us. We look at something. When the kids aren't engaged in the choice we make, then we have to say, how can we do that differently? So we really do respond to how they are responding to what's going on. And in the real world, you don't get to work, in this unit over here with everybody the same age. In the real world, we're all mixed. And you can't tell when people become adults which adult is going to have the more convincing contribution than another one. It has nothing to do with age. So again, it fits with the models of authentic learning. It's built in peer teaching, which is nice because you can have, and the nice part is when Miriam QB came, the consultant who was involved in setting up the program, in the last 2 days, she said, I went into the kindergarten rooms and I'm so happy because I asked them what grade they were in. They had no idea. And yes, because they're just learning what needs to be learned, and it's not there. And she was just like so delighted, and so was I, because that's what we want. And the grade fours are like, they're not, feeling like grade fours. They're doing whatever the challenges that they need at that time. So I'll talk a little bit about more how do we get to all that curriculum, because I know that question's in your head. More beneficial when teachers understand and value it. So the research is really clear. If the teachers are unsure and not maybe open to the idea of multi-age learning, then it's not going to be as effective. There's no question about it. So sometimes that's important to lay that out. Increases student perspective to interact with students of various ages. So they get to hear someone else's point of view, which is influenced sometimes by their age, but point of view is probably the most important thing that we need to teach our students today. They need to understand there may be 3 or 4 or 5 different points of view, and they may make a decision about which one makes sense to them, and they don't have to buy into all of them, but they have to understand them all. And that's how we're going to get kids to things like peace and things like the very important things in the world, but they can't just have a narrow, single perspective. If they're going to have it and they're going to defend it, they better understand about all the other ones. So it helps when you have kids having a debate. I was in a science class today, and they're having this amazing debate about whether memories are important or not. Like what's the benefit of having a memory? What's the benefit of not? And they understood in the end that it's not whether one is right or one is wrong in their rebuttal, but they definitely had to know what each side had to say. So they're coming closer and closer to some really strong debating skills. Also, it's very common in gifted programming. If you ever see small classes of gifted programming groups that are pulled out of schools, they're never all one age. They're all multi-ages. And I have a perspective about gifted learning, and it varies from county to county how they determine it. But giftedness is about a passion that you can't slow down. That's really what it is in the research. Sometimes they say someone's gifted because we're taking the top people who have the top scores and we'll call them gifted. But if they're not passionate about something that they can't put down, it doesn't really fit the model of what giftedness is. And so what we say is rather than try to pretend we're getting that right, we're giving everyone a gifted program. And that way we'll give them that opportunity to be passionate. You may have someone who's quite passionate about a planet right now and you're trying to do a co-investigation in grade 3 to 5. So number 6, increased engagement, self-directed. We're teaching them to be able to look at instructions and work on that while we're working with a small group at a time. There's a lot of station work and rotation. All right, so that's teaching them to be able to not always have to go back and say, is this right, is this right? It's like, hey, defend it. What did you have? Bring it forward. We'll give them the feedback when they come to see us, but they don't have to sit there and wait until it's time to go on. They're learning how to try something else on and see if they can figure it out. And parent involvement is definitely a big piece of it, because you can't have a proper multi-age environment unless you actually include parents. And parents are part of it. Anybody ever been to the Disney Institute in Florida? Again, you can take a class in reflective writing, and an 8-year-old will right beside you, and a 72-year-old will be there. That's real multi-age learning. So there's a lot of places where things like that are out there, but not enough, I don't think. Okay, so now you're going to talk to your partner and say, why were you attracted to a multi-age classroom? Go. And that this was different, and they were going to pin some hopes on this really, I'm hoping probably the big word would be engagement. Keeping their kids engaged and loving school, and that's a big goal, and we want to make sure that happens. But the assumption of being attracted to the school from multi-age classrooms is hopefully now you might have an answer for that maybe tomorrow if we get all this information we have now. These are two quotes, and the reason I pulled these, the first quote was actually a combination of a lot of research from many different researchers. But it says students show increased self-esteem, more cooperative behavior, better attitude towards school, that's important in general, and increased pro-social, the caring, the tolerant, the patient, supportive behavior. So they have increased personal relationships. Okay, that's what happens in the research so far. And there's a decline in discipline problems. So from a principal's perspective, it's like, okay, let's just do that. But what's more important to me is that love of school. And probably the most precious thing when Dave and I are like, getting everybody in the morning, and then the bell rings and they'll run and come to school. I'm like, yes, we got to keep that going. But we have to watch it when it's not so excited about coming in. What is it we can do differently to do that? So there's quite a few people that invested quite a bit of time. Now, what they found in the research is really clear. Achievement levels can vary. They never go down when they're compared with a regular test-oriented kind of school. So they don't go down. And what they said in two sets of research is one says it goes up a little bit, and the other says it stays the same. So I want to be perfectly honest about the achievement part of it, but I also think that cooperative behavior, attitudes towards school, you can't really put a price tag on that, and that's pretty powerful. And so you do get more in this situation regardless, but that's where the research is. But the research stopped when they couldn't find anything wrong with it. They just said, well, we're just repeating the same research over and over and over again. So you will see the research stops at about the 1990s and the 1993, 1997. All of this research, it got to a point where people weren't repeating it. Doesn't mean it's dated, it just means no one could find anything wrong with it. Okay, and why it sort of fell upon demise, that's part of the article that you read. There's some political reasons and so on that, it's not more popular and not more available to people. But it is being taught in the great universities in the world when it comes to teacher education. If there's ever a chance that you can find a place or at least generate or build a place that has these qualities, then it's going to be to the benefit of all the children. And mixed age grouping helps children develop social skills and a sense of belonging. When we've done the research on the folks who wind up incarcerated, the one thing they say over and over again is, I didn't belong, or nobody cares if I'm there anyway. And you may say, well, that might be our population or might not. But the bottom line is that belonging is important for everyone, and they need to belong. You got up for 6, 7 hours a day. They're going to need to feel belong in this precious time. So that's a valuable piece that helps that. Okay, so how does it play out here at MCCS? Everything we do begins with the Virginia standards. I think it's very, very important that we put that out there. We are not just picking something out of the sky and saying, oh, this would be cool to do, let's do this will engage them. No, we have to start with the standards, it's critical. But there's so much you can do with those standards that's much more interesting than just teaching the standards as isolated sections. The second part is we examine the student work. We did the diagnostic tests at the beginning, connected to the standards to see what did they retain and what did they still need to know, so that we start them where they left off. And that's exactly what we did with the first month. So there's a lot of different kinds of groups getting together to be able to try out different things to say. Is this too far above? Is this too easy for someone? And a lot of the kids are telling us, that's too easy for me, or that's too, my brain is stretching me too much. And then I need to just back it up a few steps and say, well, let's do this, and then we'll catch up with that tomorrow. But it's really important to know that it does start from the idea of what have they started, what have they mastered. Sometimes they can master something in 2 lessons, and sometimes they need 25 lessons. But we know when we learned how to ride a bike, or I was used to do gymnastics, I used to do kips, and all my friends kind of got them on the 15th or 20th try, and I think I had to do at least 700 kips before I finally got it. And I'll never forget that because I was very persistent, obviously, because most people quit probably before that. But that's important to know, and not to give up. And most people give up after 3 or 4 tries. And that's why math is a real problem, because people are unloading things and not going back at it a different way. And finally, the themes were chosen for each quarter out of social studies and science. Okay, and the curriculum, so they could concentrate on the individual skills. So it is definitely connected. All roads will lead back to the Virginia standards. So there's no question in my mind that they should do very well on those tests, because it's going to actually have some staying power. It's going to have that stick-to-itiveness that we need. This program will help. So this is kind of some examples, some pictures. You can see some of the things the kids are doing. I don't know if you can tell that those are all different grades. They're certainly not all grade 5s in that picture, but they're very much engaged in problem solving. It's called, build a tower. It's the very first day of school. So here's how they got together to solve something. Very difficult to get 4 people engaged. I could do that activity and be sure 100% of my class, if I paired them up, they'd be forced to negotiate with somebody else. But if I had them in groups of 4, that means I just caught a great picture. But I could have showed you quite a few other pictures where 2 people were kind of doing it all, and the other sat back and go, well, that's nice. But I will say that it can work, but it takes a very gifted teacher to make it work in these groups. So, what are we doing so far? I'm going to give you a couple examples from 3 to 5 and an example of 8 to 2. In math, we focus on problem solving every day. The whole class gets the same problem. It's teacher-led mini lesson for, I think it lasts somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes at the most. And then the other students work with manipulatives at stations. So after they've done their problem of the day, then they break up and they go to stations, and then they come and they work with us in a 1 to 2 or 3 or 4, depends on how many are working on the same idea at the same time, and they rotate through. So when I was working with a group in the last month, I said to them, I'm not going to see you every single day. Even though I was working with maybe 10 to 12 students, I only saw them maybe in a concentrated way for about 15 minutes every 2 or 3 times in that week. But I think the answer is when they come home and they say, this is what I learned, and I want to go find out more about it on the internet, because I think it was Adrian. He says, I did that on Khan Academy that day. And so to me, that's a measure that, it had a lasting effect. And so that's important to know that, did you have time with that person today? It's a quality of time that you get, concentrated time, than it is to be getting, a teacher kind of walking around saying, check, check, check. And this is a real deep dive into making sure that they understand what's the blockage of what's going on. So in the grade 3 to 5 social studies, when students are learning about Virginia, one group's this is an example of what they go through for the year. At the beginning of the year, one of the groups who hadn't mastered one single paragraph writing, that would be their goal. Once they've gone from single paragraph by the end of the year, or maybe partway through the year, they're ready to master 3 paragraphs. But the older group at that time, or the group that's already being be very confident in the writing, may start at a 3-paragraph essay, and then at the end of the year they'll be doing 5 paragraphs. So we have very specific targets that we're working, and depending on where the students are at, they can go from a 1 paragraph to a 5 paragraph in 3 months, or it could take 3 years. But we're going to target that each time to make sure they get it down, because writing is a mess in high school and in college. So we want to make sure that when they leave grade 5, they're going to be able to handle any kind of assignment in a very big way. So in grade K2, this is a great example. When I was, I think I went into Miss Browning's class, and the kids were doing magnets, and I heard these little guys talking about repelling. And it was like kindergarten kids using the word properly, because they're showing something, they're trying to, this is magnetized because it's sticking together, and this one, I can't get it to stick together because it's repelling. And they're using that language. And today, when I listened to the K-2 teachers do some planning, the one thing I was really pleased to hear is they said, those kindergartens can handle a lot more than we thought. And I went, yes, that's what this is about. If you can put a ceiling on with the grade level, or you can't. And they're starting to, the kids themselves are teaching them what wonderful opportunities are there. So that's an example. And the other part that I think is important to mention is that if you're in a K-2 situation, all the students have access to the same 3 program that the 3s are doing. So it's not like there's a big divide between K-2 and 3 to 5. The 5s work on back and forth between 5 and 6 kind of programming. So I'm doing some pre-algebra and things like that that are really part of the 6 program. That's how we're able to do it. We follow the lead of the students. We don't want to rush to something because they don't have the basic understanding. That's been the problem in math right away. So we're very specific about where let's say lots of people are doing different things, because that's what they need to do, and that's what true individual learning is, versus one size fits all, which is pretty common in schools. So here's an example of an art class, and you can't sit down and say that must be a grade 3 or that's a grade 4 or grade 5. And arts is a beautiful example because it's really not age specific when they're going to be showing their gifts, and it's really nice to have them all there in one place. This is kind of cool. This is you really can't tell this class which student is younger or which student is older when you've got the key pairings, artwork. What I liked about this is they had to choose their own word that they thought was part of the community, because they start with community study and social studies. And so, yeah, they may have gotten help with some of them. Maybe that N on United, yeah, we got to turn that around to get there. But they're really doing some thinking about what does that mean. And so they're doing a lot of integrated ideas there with language and art. Okay, I'm getting to the end of Vinci. This is the C word, create. We use this a lot. When we teach kids about making conclusions, in the old days, it used to be, I conclude that this is right and wrong in the scientific method. And we're teaching kids when they're doing investigations to think about, when they create something, they have to create a conclusion, they have to make a statement about something at the end of their experience, but then they have to acknowledge limitations. What would have happened if I had 5 more weeks? What would have happened if I was able to go to the Smithsonian to actually see whatever they were studying? What would have happened if? So they need to learn to list limitations. This is starting to sound a lot like a graduate class, but that's exactly what the International Baccalaureate program does in the primary years program. So we're able to steal some of that because we're not paid for that, but getting the kids to acknowledge what the limitations are, that they're not handing you something perfect, they can talk to you about how it could have been better. So when we talk about the project so far, the multi-age, the research isn't in. We need a year. We need a year at least, or 2, to gather the data in order to say that this has been beneficial. So it does require folks to be patient, for us to be able to get that information in before we make the decision. It's also very labor intensive. It's a lot easier for a teacher to put the video on or to put something on and just have a chat after. But to create those stations where they're doing that individual work at their own level, they have to find time to make those stations. And this year, because we're all new, they're kind of making them as we go. And they're doing a great job. And there's going to be more and more station work, which you will see. But it is labor intensive when it's done well. So it does take more time, and that's why our teachers get an hour or more planning time a day than anyone else in Loudoun County. So we give them 90 minutes a day, and Loudoun County gives them 30. So we do build that into what we do, but we know it's going to be a lot more than that to be able to put their stations together. Things to watch out for, and this is the big concern that if you have it, you should be having that concern. Older students can feel less challenged. We hope we really are doing something about that. We hope that that's not the case, but that can happen. And we have to really say, where are you now? Where do you need to go next? And it means we have to crawl into a grade 7 or a grade 8 program, so be it. But we got to get them where they're ready to learn next. We don't want them to be sitting around waiting for people to catch up. The younger students can feel overwhelmed. So we're really watching that carefully. So the Thoroughbred Express and the social emotional development programs we have, they matter. So we really get them to tune in to say, these are my feelings, this is how I'm feeling right now. Let me take it down a few notches, and so on. So we definitely need to be aware that those are some feelings that kids can have. I'll be honest, I haven't seen evidence of that on any wide-scale level right now. I mean, but you would know more when they go home and they say to you, hey, this is what happened at school today. So we do get that info, and we will be collecting it in surveys as well, because we can't always get everything. We think we've got those two things handled, but we're going to be upfront if that's going to be a problem. So then when you're doing a conclusion, you generate questions. So the questions we had at the beginning were pretty open-ended. What's it like at Middleburg Community School? Now, once you become an expert at all of this language that I've just been sharing, now we can actually ask bigger questions like, could we be a destination for people to learn about multi-age learning, right? And so we're not there yet. We need a couple of years of research under our belt, but that's a question that we can ask if we're really confident about what we're doing. Finally, we have to evaluate. As I said, we gather the input. We can also generate our own theories about what works. Okay, this is what worked in the research in the 90s. This is what works now with the digital age student, and so on. It's different. So we've got some things that we can share. And recommendations, what do we do next? So moving on, we will ... Okay, this is where you get to almost get ready for your activity, because I'm almost finished my talk here. I will go around and be doing something in a minute. So the question when you get to inspire, this is not on a lot of curriculum. Okay? How can we teach others about what we've learned? It's not just a presentation. How do we teach? You teach something, you hope it'll stick, and then you go teach other people. And how can we move others to positive action? So it's not just enough to say, I know all this stuff, I've been tested, Bart's going to give me a little test, do I know what, zone proximal development is, do I know what appropriate is, and you can get 100%, but if you can't talk about it to somebody and explain it, then it's like Pericles says, you're at the level of he who cannot think. If you can't talk it, you need to be able to get them to do it. So if you've got kids that are great talkers, you are lucky, because they naturally are comfortable that way. And we have to get kids to want to talk, and they have to find a way in. It's not always easy, but it will help them enormously. And now I'll just mention Susan Drake's book. If you're looking for a deeper read, she's written a book on creating standards-based integrated curriculum. And I'm in there somewhere in a chapter that she's interviewed me and a lot of people who've been involved in this kind of learning. But Susan's stuff, she's probably one of the world's leading experts on integrated curriculum. And we might be able to bring her here, maybe for a talk, I don't know. But that's what the book looks like, and if you want to get a book, then that's one I think that covers it in a big way. Now, time to go into your zone of proximal development. Some folks around the table are more expert, okay, than others. This is normal. It's okay. I heard someone at this table saying, my son's really good at X, but not as good at Y. Exactly, that is so normal. To see a report card with all A's, what is that? Think about it, right? If it was all A's, then everybody would be doing everybody else's job all the time because we're so good at everything. And it's not true. So to ask your kids to get all A's or say, on the bio Corvette, if you get all A's, it's not real. And you've got to be able to sort of celebrate the B's or celebrate the scores that are saying, this is where I am in this. But celebrate the fact that, they're aware. And a lot of gifted kids sometimes get called gifted because they get all A's. But really, the gifted kid is the kid who gets A only in the Titanic and gets, B's and C's and any other kind of boat, right? Because all we care about is the Titanic. You can try and teach buoyancy. There's a lot of things you can teach with the Titanic, but that's what giftedness is. And that's the difference between all A's on our report card and not. So we're not going to have A's and B's on our report cards. We're going to have started and mastered. And you're going to know exactly what they know. And that's going to continue all the way through. All right? So that's a difference that is important to know because we want to get them to be at that master level. And they have to be able to talk it and be able to do a lot with it. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You're going to read through the following to determine who you are. It's a little self-awareness test. Do you think you are an expert about multi-age learning? That means you don't necessarily need to review your notes to talk about it. You kind of got it down. You can apply these practices when you're getting groups of people together. Okay, so how do you actually operate that way? You can talk about it without referring to text, which I said. You know which researcher has contributed to it. That's important because you know that this researcher only went this far and only did it with like 27 people. But this researcher over here, was much more comprehensive. They did it with like 8,000 people. So to know the difference between it is good to know. Because a lot of people tell you this is backed up in research, but they don't necessarily go the depth of understanding it. So grab some academics sometimes and say, is that really peer-reviewed research or not? And they will let you know, because that's what we used to do for our living. But I think it's important to know there's a difference. So, are you at an apprentice level? So you need to read and mark up key points. So you need, to view it in action. So you need to kind of say, I need to watch that class more often to see how those groups move from A to B. And we will videotape, and you will see how these are going. We definitely just have to get all our technology together so we can see that. I think that is important. And finally, the novice level, you can't explain any benefits of ML. You might think ML is just split classes. So I'm hoping after this presentation, you're somewhere at the apprentice level or maybe the expert level. It depends what your background is and what your interest is in what we're doing. But I know you don't leave those classes. So finally, the first barrier to learning is the fear of something not being understood. So that's always in the way of kids when you first introduce something new. They're like, I want to be that one who doesn't understand. I want to be that one. And just that's a barrier by itself. So getting kids to take risks is important. So help someone now understand what you read for homework. Okay? And to do that, you're going to use what's called the PLC, which I spoke about at the beginning, which is Professional or Parent Learning Community. You're going to choose a spokesperson from your group, okay? And you'll have about 2 or 3 minute snapshot of your PLC. Now, I'm not going to do ready, set, go yet. Hold on. So you will see this chart, okay? And there's one for everybody. You get to fill it in. And then you can choose a spokesperson, one from each table, to maybe talk about some of the things you hear. So I'm going to get, it's just individual, so everybody does one of their own. And take a few minutes right now, and then we'll bring you back up to do sharing. Thank you.